people flowing in. Very happy to have you here, Ben. I'm going to, if it's okay, go ahead and turn this over to, I like to think of Zach as our benefactor here and our maven. And Zach, if you want to let us know how you came across Ben's work and basically how you hooked us all up, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lisa. And thanks everyone for coming. It's great to see some familiar faces. Ben Denzer, who I'm very grateful to have presenting for us tonight, is an artist, designer, and publisher currently based in Boston. His work has been collected by the Met, the Guggenheim, the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, and the University of Oxford, among other institutions. I learned about his work at the Boston Art Book Fair in 2019, where he had a table set up for his ongoing project, Catalog Press. Through that, he publishes objects or books as objects, with titles such as 6,000 Dandelions from the Mount Auburn Cemetery, 77 Lucky Sevens, and $192 bills. Another project of Ben's was praised by Bella Hadid as the most important Instagram out there today. Ben, I need to know if this is true. It's called Ice Cream Books and pairs, in his words, great reads with frozen desserts. This guy stays incredibly busy, I have to imagine, also teaching the last couple of years at RISD, Princeton, the School of Visual Arts, Parsons, and the Center for Book Arts in New York, as well as making illustrations for the New Yorker, New York Times, book covers for a variety of publishers, and last but not least, vegetable bags for Hermes. I'm really excited to hear from him, so I'm going to stop talking now, but please join me in welcoming and thanking Ben Denzer.
Great, thanks so much, Zach. And thanks to the Society of Printers for inviting me to speak. I'm really honored and excited. So thanks, Zach, for that introduction, and also thanks for making such great little graphics, advertising the talk. But you've set the bar high, by saying Zach has advertised that this is going to be a very interesting talk. So I'm going to try and keep it interesting. The only way I know how to do that is just to kind of overwhelm with images and move relatively fast. So that's what I'm going to try and do. So my name is Ben Denzer. I'm an artist, designer, and publisher. And while those sound like three different hats that I might be wearing, in reality, they're often the same hat, and that hat often has the word, books on it. And a lot of the things I do right now revolve around books in one way or another. I make my own books and publish them as Catalog Press. Like Zach said, I also design book covers. I worked for a period of time, like 3.5 years, as an in-house designer at Penguin. Now I do lots of book covers on a freelance basis. I do the insides of books. This is a catalog for an exhibition that happened at Center for Book Arts this past summer. I do editorial illustrations revolving around books. I have this Instagram called Ice Cream Books, where I photograph books and ice cream and then post the results to Instagram. And then I teach often, book related things. So I have a few classes I teach at Center for Book Arts, which is this great place in New York. If you don't know about it, definitely check it out. And then for the past few years, I've been teaching some courses at Parsons and SVA. And because I like teaching so much, I'm now back to being a student myself to learn how to be a better teacher and open more teaching doors in the future. So I'm currently at RISD getting a 2-year master's in graphic design. And so in thinking about how to, describe and share my work and, go through all of these things that the subtitle says, dandelions, mortadella, wheels, stamps, skin cells, dollar bills, ice cream, and more. I thought it might make sense to start, at the beginning, or as close to the beginning as possible, to give some context on kind of where all of these things came from. So this is me in 4th grade with a tape sculpture, which is something that I made. I was always making things as a kid, I think partially as a product of not having cable or video games accessible to me. So I was always in the basement watching Pixar movies on repeat. And I think this whole thing started by making like a log cabin type structure, by rolling paper into tubes and taping them shut. And then realizing that if I rolled the tape, into tubes sticky side out, it became this unit that I could, combine with other rolls of tape sticky side out. And I played with Legos a lot as a kid. So this idea of like having base units that could make something, I think was must have been natural to me. And for whatever reason, my parents, encouraged me to keep, watching Pixar movies on repeat and making tape sculptures in the basement. And so that's what I did, throughout elementary school and middle school. I was, making these things, and they got more realistic. I got into Star Wars. So I made, some Star Wars, sculptures. This was my Halloween costume in 2005. The helmet's, 100% out of tape. And the rest is, tape that's been painted and on top of clothing. The iPhone was announced, and I really wanted an iPhone, but it wasn't out, and I was just a kid, so I made an iPhone out of tape. And so this is something I just kept doing, and because I was always making stuff, the word architecture was thrown out a lot when I was growing up and thinking about what I wanted to study in college. This was senior prank day at my high school, where the seniors divvied up the classrooms, and me and a friend, David White, got this history teacher's room. We made this crazy twine situation. This teacher, Dr. Ketchel, taught the whole day through. Showing you this because it's kind of an architecture-ish thing. And so when I was applying to schools, I knew I wanted to study architecture. So I applied to schools kind of with that in mind. I was super lucky to get into Princeton. And once I got into Princeton, I started investigating and seeing what Princeton, had going on. And I saw there was this student design agency there, kind of a student-run graphic design firm where these students would design posters and logos for various groups on campus. And I saw that you had to have a portfolio to apply to this thing. And I knew I wanted to be a part of it. So I put together a bunch of fake logos for what I thought were all non-existent clubs. So things like, the Stamp Collecting Club or the Taxidermy Society. And one of these was the Princeton Beekeeping Club. And then I got to Princeton and went to the activities fair and saw that, there actually is a Princeton Beekeeping Club. And so I signed up, put my name on the sheet, mostly to try and infiltrate, this organization, to then give them my logo and make this a reality. And it was a success. This is the Princeton Bee Team. There's lots of bad puns in the beekeeping world. And so these are jerseys that have, my logo there. And so I studied architecture and visual arts at Princeton, which was great because I got to explore a lot of new tools and techniques and just make a bunch of things. This was an ant farm I made for an architecture project once. This is a chair I made in another architecture class, and another piece of furniture I made in a sculpture class. And I just really tried to explore as much as possible. I got a grant to take a glassblowing class one summer, so I stretched out these bottles, and I found it always kind of productive to work in series. So making some drawings for architecture and make a bunch of them. And this was particularly something I kind of leaned on when, junior year in the visual arts department, you're given a little studio and told to make stuff. And I had no idea what, I wanted to make or what I would make. So I found myself going to bookshops and finding old books with interesting images and collaging them, and not really knowing, that a collage is going to be necessarily good or interesting when I do it. So trying to do a lot of them, if you make 500 collages, there's definitely going to be like one or two good, interesting ones within there. So this is something I just kind of kept doing. And then I would scan them in, as kind of these documentations. And Princeton's visual art department is housed in this old elementary school building. So it's a relatively old building. So as I was scanning these things, I saw a cockroach along the floor, in this building where I'm scanning these things. So I took the cockroach, put it on the scanner, and this happened. And I show you this not to, gross you out if you just had dinner or something, but because I think it's relatively interesting. Didn't expect to see a cockroach, but had a scanner, put the cockroach on there, and then you get this crazy thing that happens when the cockroach kind of crawls along the scanner. And so I show you this because this is kind of, to me, embodies kind of my experience in undergrad of just, having things around and experimenting and exploring with them. So then I got really interested in the power of the scanner, and had, some bees that unfortunately were dead from the beekeeping club. And so it took some really interesting bee scans. What happens if you put saran wrap on a scanner? What if you scanned a shirt and then turn that into a pattern and then, print that as wallpaper? I went home for a winter break and, found some photos that we were kind of gonna throw out, and I had a Sharpie. So I thought, what if I can collage, into these photos? And again, just trying to take what I had around me, playing off of things and, manipulating them in some way. So continuing this idea with this kind of found book of comparative photography. I took a printmaking class, and again, didn't really know what I wanted to, make as a print. So again, I leaned into, finding old books and printing things, into them, taking advantage of the laser cutters that I had access to in the architecture department to laser cut, blocks and print them into these, books that I then scanned to document. And then I realized, what if I, scan these pages first so that I can then have the image and make a custom, wood block to then print back into them. So I made a series of work that kind of did that, making these blocks that I'd print back into on top of the pages, these kind of abstract designs that related to them. The culmination of that was kind of this Arms and Armor pamphlet from the Met, where I printed kind of CMY colors, into this thing. And, ultimately printing the colors into it didn't really look that great, but the plates themselves were kind of surprisingly interesting to me. And then I realized, at this point in college, that everything I was doing kind of revolved around, books. I'm taking old books and collaging them, I'm printing into books. I just taken a graphic design class as well. And my professor brought in a designer, Jason Alejandro from Princeton University Press, who's a book cover designer, to kind of serve as a visiting critic for our last day of class. And it was the first time that I realized there's a job out there where, people pay you to read books and then think about them and then make the image that sends them into the world. And it sounded just like an amazing thing to do. So from that point on in college, I tried to try to turn all of my projects into book projects with the goal of, eventually having this portfolio that could get me a book cover design job. And so things like we had this architecture assignment where we had to analyze a garden, and I was given Stowe Garden in England. And I went to the library and found this book that had these poems and these spot illustrations. And so I took this book and turned it into my own kind of book set of these little pamphlets that walk through the garden, kind of trying to translate the experience of walking through this garden into a series of little booklets. So they're all printed on vellum, so you can kind of see through it. And it's, as you flip the pages, it's almost as you're walking through the garden on a misty day. You pass this, go under this arch, you go up this path, reach this other building, and then you can choose your own adventure on what path you take next through the garden. I was reading a lot of books for class in college, but I was always reading them, in the form of these disembodied PDFs, bits of books that had been scanned. And so in the visual arts side of things, I was thinking about this. And I was thinking, how do you emphasize the objectness of books? Books are both objects and content. And in all my classes, we were treating them just as content, just as the PDFs of their pages. And so I started doing things to books to try and emphasize their objectness. If you drill holes through a book, or if you put nails in it, or if you nail it shut, you definitely can't access its content, and it foregrounds its objectness. And so I was grabbing things from the sculpture shop, hooks and all these things, and just seeing what I could do to books, putting wheels on books so you can roll them around. And so the ultimate container for all of this stuff was kind of a pop-up shop. That was my senior thesis show, essentially. And so there was a gallery space, and I was there as a shopkeep, kind of for a whole week. And then there was a website where people could peruse and buy these, modified books. And I also was interested in the idea of, making art and then people engaging with it, not just on the level of, oh, that's interesting, or, oh, I like it, but, do I like this enough to want to have it in my house? Is this worth $30 to me? And so you could click on each of these and see, more about what these objects were. And then these are some installation shots of the actual exhibit or shop. Had lots of postcards, playing off the idea of like what a museum gift shop feels like. And these are the books on wheels that people would come into the gallery and roll around on. And then every student at Princeton writes a written thesis, and in the architecture department, you get to design, the thesis as well. So this was my kind of final thesis book for architecture, where I wrote a thesis about the Container Corporation of America and the Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies, and Herbert Bayer's influence in kind of both of these things. And so I got to, write this book, do the research, and also design it. And so a lot of the argument, or one of the arguments in my thesis, kind of revolves around this world geographic atlas that Herbert Bayer designed for the Container Corporation of America. One of my theses was that, this atlas was used as kind of this advertisement for mobility itself. And so I put some wheels on it and kind of combined, my two projects here. So then I'm graduating from college, and I'm, realizing, hey, I've loved playing with all these books, but now I want to find some way that someone will pay me to keep playing with all these books. So just like I had to make a, portfolio of fake logos to get into the student design agency at Princeton, I knew I had to make some fake book covers to try and get a book cover design job. And so I got some advice which was to try and copy something. And through copying it, you'll learn how the thing works, and you'll also make something that'll inherently be new because you're doing it. So I was really interested in these penguin crime books at the time. And with the help of my partner, Lily, who created the titles for these, I made these New Jersey Transit crime series. So I don't know if anyone here, in Boston has ever ridden the New Jersey Transit, but these are all kind of stops along the Northeast Corridor line. So if you're in Princeton and going to New York, you pass all these stops like Sleigh Bells in Secaucus, Metro Park After Dark, One-Way Ticket to Trenton, the Edison Exterminator. And again, just using what I had, around. I had already scanned a cockroach randomly. And so I have this cockroach now used on my fake book cover. And if you haven't, been in the New Jersey Transit, maybe you can still empathize with this title, Trapped in a Penn Station Pickle. And so I made these. And I also, thought, how can I make more book covers, quickly? Well, I have all these collages that I made. Maybe I can mine these collages and kind of turn them into fake book covers. So I made this Shakespeare series, looking through, saying, what book does this feel like? Oh, this feels like it could be Mark Twain, or, oh, this feels like it could be Dracula or Robinson Crusoe. And so I made all these, and then was super fortunate that around the time I was graduating, there was a spot open at Penguin for a new, junior designer. And so I went and applied, showed them all these things. They liked it, but they said, we can't tell that you know how to handle, typography. A lot of these things are image driven. So then I had a long, 4th of July weekend before I had my next interview with the creative director at Penguin. And so I tried to quickly put together some type-driven, book covers. So I took a boarhead. I'm a fan of boarheads and have a book of short stories. Haven't read all the short stories, but took the titles of the short stories as a means to create kind of a series of books. And again, grabbing things I had around. I already had this illustration. Maybe I can use it for this, story called The Story of the Warrior. I had some tinfoil. Maybe I can make a book cover out of tinfoil. I had some, duct tape. I can make a book cover of that. I ordered some noodles. I can make a book cover out of that. I had some sriracha and some paper towels. Maybe I can make a type-driven book cover from that. And so I put these things together, and luckily it all, worked. And I got this job designing book covers at Penguin. And I was there kind of as an in-house designer for 3.5 years. These are, on the backs of books, you have the barcode and the Penguin logo, and I tried to sneak as many fun little penguins on as I could, and these are a few of them. And these are some of the book covers I've made over the years. And being a book cover designer is a great, job, because you get, ownership over these small visual projects that then go out into the world. And, as you can see, there's like a diversity of things that I get to read, and a diversity of, visual things that I get to explore and play with. And just like putting nails in books or drilling holes through it, I think like a good book cover should be able to imbue some quality of understanding that this is a physical object. And, should ideally leave people, like the phrase goes, picking it up because of its cover, judging it based on its cover. So this is a book cover that just came out that I'm super excited by, that does that kind of in this more explicit way, emphasizing the objectness of books. So this is a book about kind of how Amazon has changed the world of fiction. And so for this book I made, this is the cover, and it's all these spines, the title is there all these times. On the back, it's also spines. And then this is the whole unfolded, dust jacket, where this is the cover, this black, spine is actually the spine of the book. And this is the front flap and the back flap. And so behind, each of these book covers that I just showed you, and each of every, book cover you have ever seen in your life, is a bunch of book covers that never made it to the final shelf. A bunch of designs that got pitched and then didn't make it. And behind all of these, there's a bunch of experimentations and trials and errors that led to, the amount of things that got shown to the editor and publisher, and then eventually got on the final book. And so whenever I'm designing a book cover, it's always terrifying. Like no matter how many book covers I've designed, it always feels like I have no idea what to do when I'm confronted with this, blank page of an InDesign document. So I try and get off of the computer as much as possible, because I find it's easier to kind of just get started, when I make things physically. And also because I'd rather spend, 2 hours carving a block of foam than 2 hours staring at my computer, freaking out. And there are pros and cons to both of these. One being, when you show this, to the editor and the publisher, like we did, and they say, we like this, but, we're not a huge fan of the typeface. Maybe if you could just change the typeface, that means I need to get another block of foam and, start carving again. but I think it's well worth the process. For this book cover, it ended up, the one that we ended up going with was this kind of process of kind of ripping paper and scanning it. And then I eventually kind of blurred some of the edges to give it this weirder quality. But I really think you get a lot from making things physically. Here on the left is kind of a design I made on the computer. And on the right is the effect of kind of printing out that design, cutting out the leaves, and kind of, so there's a little bit of dimension, and photographing that in natural light. And you just get something that feels, more alive. Same here. This is a process of cutting out these strips of topography and photographing them on different plexiglass sheets over a light booth, which I'll show you more images of in a second. And so again, a lot of this is because it'd be really hard for me to, like, through Photoshop, make bubble wrap seem realistic, but I can just print out the cover and then put bubble wrap on it, and boom, you have this amazing effect. And so these are just some images of various physical processes I've played with, playing with water, playing with, shadows and light, blowing up balloons, writing on them, and then popping them. And, you can see here, it took a lot of attempts to get this perfect pop where it kind of ruined the balloon, but didn't quite ruin the typography. Poking holes in things, having different layers of paper, making dioramas that feel, realistic. And again, when you make something physically, you get these wonderful effects that'd be so hard to, like, think through and do intentionally if you're trying to fake it in some way. And sometimes I, come across a visual idea that I like that doesn't get selected for the cover. And so I keep, trying it multiple ways and exploring it. And so I tried to think of a lot of my time at Penguin kind of like I was doing at Princeton, where I kind of would find some technique and just keep playing with it. So, I got these plexiglass sheets and there was a light table. And so I tried a bunch of things of printing out, words on clear sheets, or words on different colors, and putting them on different layers of the plexiglass and seeing these effects that you might get. And I found it really generative just to keep kind of riffing on a technique or a process. And so again, this is that cover that I showed you earlier. This is kind of how it gets put together, where there's many different levels of plexiglass, and the different sheets of paper are on different levels, and then you get the shadows between them. And this was that final cover. Just a few more, ripping the paper and pulling it out. This is a cover that came from this technique, cutting into the paper and exposing other different colored sheets behind it. Playing more with colored paper and kind of how it can flow. And so I've developed, I have a lot of experiments that now I can kind of pillage whenever I need to, whenever something might work for the right cover. This is one that I really love that never made it. This is not, you won't find this book cover anywhere, but I liked it. And I also try and have as much fun as possible, when designing book covers. This is a book cover that I pitched that didn't get approved. And so I had another book that I thought would work for it, and I pitched this, and it didn't get approved. And then I had another book that I thought might work for this, and I pitched this idea, and it didn't get approved. And I knew this one would not get approved, but this was kind of just a joke for the people who knew that I really liked this book cover design. And so one day I'm going to get a book cover approved that, has this kind of goofy person made out of the type effect on it. And so, book covers being these things that you get all this, ownership over these small projects, you can also hide little fun Easter eggs. Like, this is a book about how CEOs are paid too much. And if you look really closely where it says the Secretary of the Treasury, you'll see that I'm the Secretary of the Treasury. This was a super fun book cover for this wild book called A Guide for Murdered Children, where I got to use Comic Sans and have sparkles on the book cover. But what I love most about this is, this handwriting right here was done by my mom. So in the jacket, it says, jacket designed by Ben Denzer, jacket hand lettering by Sue Bernstein. And my partner, Lily Offit, cut up these paper flames. And it's just really fun to collaborate with people that I know, in this way on these type of projects. My future father-in-law is a huge fan of eclipses, and he has this great photo of an eclipse that I've been trying forever to get onto a book cover, and I recently succeeded. And so it's on this kind of papal thriller right here, over this cross. This is a book about kind of the after effects of Andy Warhol's death. And so I made this cover that plays off of Interview magazine. And you can see it's this crowd scene with Andy Warhol here, 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 here. And if you look right here in the far upper reaches, you'll see I put myself there in the back of the book cover. And so this is a book cover that I didn't design personally, but it's a book about this woman's dysfunctional family. It's a series of humorous essays. And so this is a photo of her actual dysfunctional family. And when you put people on a book cover, you have to get, their approval, and to have them, so they have the rights. So you have the rights to use their image. And this one member of the family, this one cousin, didn't want anything to do with this project. So we love this book cover, and we had to find a way to replace, this one person. And so how do you do that? You get your coworker to take a photo of you. And then, so I photoshopped my way onto this book cover, where the final kind of image here is my facial features on this, person's facial structure. And the best part about this was the author then used this as a way to talk about her book. So there's this whole article in the LA Times where she kind of describes the process of, Penguin Random House changing the face of this, relation for this book cover. But she didn't know this was my face. She thought we grabbed a nose from this stock site and a mouth from this other stock photo site. But really it's just me. So there's this whole article talking about this face, saying it has the Mona Lisa smile and all of these things, but it's really just my smile. So while I was at Penguin, I also got the opportunity to redesign one of their imprints. So I got to make a new logo for Plume, which is this imprint that tries to be kind of youthful and fun. So I made this P that kind of spirals in and out, getting bigger and smaller as needed. So here you can see it could be really big on a big spine, really small on a small spine, or really, really big on a tote bag, for example. And then I also do editorial illustrations, revolving around books. So this is, some book eyeglasses I made for the New Yorker. This is a few book illustrations for the New York Times. This was actually for AARP magazine for their list of fall books. And this was for their list of winter thrillers, a little bit of a whodunit. Not me. And this was for their summer books. And I really like doing these book-related illustrations because it forces me to, again, kind of push and prod this object that we all kind of know and are familiar with. And so how many different ways can I, treat the book or do something different with the book or kind of push it into a new place? And so it's always a fun challenge. These are some of my favorite illustrations. They're spot, illustrations for the New Yorker, taking kind of famous chairs and making them from books. And this led to a really exciting project I did at the New York Times, where for a month I had spot illustrations in the paper every day, kind of taking the newspaper and using it to make well-known pieces of architecture or well-known buildings. And so on the side of all this, I have this Instagram account called Ice Cream Books, where I take ice cream and I take books, I combine them, and I photograph the results. And it started from a few places, one being similar to putting nails on books. If you put ice cream on books, people are forced to realize that, hey, this book is an object. And oftentimes they might get mad at you that you put ice cream on a book, but have no fear, book lovers in this audience, the ice cream wipes right off of most books. Unless it's like an uncoated paper cover or something, you might have a little stain, but this is a fake bookshelf behind me, but I have a real bookshelf full of books that have been touched by ice cream and are all completely fine. And it also started from kind of working at Penguin and realizing that publishers send out, lots of books to places like the New York Times and New Yorker to review and generate buzz. But they also send out lots of free books to quote unquote bookstagrammers or people on Instagram who are going to take a nice photo of their book, with latte art, or, they'll do things like partner with a sock company to do matching socks based on the book cover. And I thought this was just this crazy thing. So I wanted to kind of participate in this crazy bookstagrammer Instagram world while kind of making fun of it at the same time. And so I got some ice cream, I got a book, I put them together, posted it on Instagram, tagged the publisher, the author, the editor, whoever, the book cover designer. And then I kept doing it, partially because I thought, as an art project, it's better with the more quantity there is, kind of like I was saying about the collages and all these other things. And then it just kind of grew and grew and more people followed it and it grew and grew. And soon I was becoming the very thing that I was, making fun of, where I was doing events at ice cream shops. For example, like at Oddfellows, we had Oddfellows make a custom ice cream flavor for Stephanie Danler's Sweet Bitter book. And then, so they made this mulled red wine ice cream. And then the author, Stephanie Danler, came, to Oddfellows, and we had kind of an event like a bookstore reading and signing, but it was in an ice cream shop and there was ice cream, tasting as part of it. So it's been super fun, the things that have come out of this project. one of which I got this image on the back page of the New York Times book review. This was during their summer reading special, and all of these books have sun in the title. This one's especially fun for me because I also designed this book, and I designed it for a friend of mine from high school who kind of self-published this book, this novel called She Beyond Sun. And he self-published it on Amazon and sold, a decent amount of copies, but, not a crazy amount. So this was exciting to be here because when he published his second book in 2020, he was able to say almost 2 years after his debut novel was featured in the New York Times book review, and it's true here's his debut novel featured in the New York Times book review. And as Zach said, the project has kind of cut across the culture in funny, weird ways, where one day out of the blue, I just got, 1,000 followers in the span of like 10 minutes. And it was because Bella Hadid had somehow found my account and shouted me out on Snapchat. And if it seems like I have like a nice studio with lots of colored backdrops and the assistant on a motorbike who runs out, and gets the ice cream and brings it back in a cooler, that's not the case. The case is that, these photos are taken on the street with ice cream and a book and a white backdrop. And the color is obviously photoshopped in. And I do this because, it's easier to just be outside the ice cream shop with the ice cream. And so this is great because it's easy to do, but, there's also people that are there and there's wind that happens. And so, these things often don't last very long. But for me, that's good because I never know when to stop taking photos. Like I never know when the right photo is in the moment. So if it all falls apart, I have to be fine and say, okay, there was a great photo, before this, most likely. And then because I'm doing it on the street, often becomes this weird performance art thing where people interact with it. This guy was walking by and didn't engage with the weirdness of me having ice cream on books, but he just looked at them and looked at me and he said, are you done with those? And I said, yeah, I guess I'm done. And then he just took one and walked off with all these dogs he was walking. Sometimes you leave your book on the street, go into the ice cream shop to get the ice cream, run out, and this is what you find. In this case, a truck had stepped on the book. But anyway, that's ice cream books. When I was working at Penguin, another benefit to working at a large corporation like Penguin is that there are, these corporate benefits. One of which being Penguin had this great tuition reimbursement program. So because I was in the art department, I was able to take classes, take a screen printing class, take a risograph class, and then I took a hardcover bookbinding class at the Center for Book Arts in New York. And, prior to that moment, I had thought about hardcover books as this thing that Penguin produces in some factory somewhere as this kind of perfect machined object that, how am I going to make a hardcover book? But then you take a class and you realize that, hey, a hardcover on a book is really just 3 rectangles of material glued onto another rectangle, with all the edges folded in. And so it really did demystify the process of kind of making a book for me. And it kind of led to me being really excited about the potential for making my own books. And then I was on the Center for Book Arts, email list. And so I saw they had this artist residency opportunity and I applied and was super fortunate to get it, which gave me a year, of studio space access and free classes at their space. And so I used that year to kind of start this project called Catalog Press, which is a small edition press where I make all these books by hand, and they're all catalogs of one, form or another. So these are all the books that I kind of made within that first year as a resident at Center for Book Arts. And so the books are all catalogs. So this is a book called The Details, which contains 2,000 images of architectural details that I've just taken on my phone over the past few years. And they're all sorted according to kind of type of thing. So, it goes from circle windows to half circle windows to square windows and on and on and on. This is a book called Stamp Compositions, which is 3,000 stamps where I've emptied the kind of content from the stamps. So if it was a stamp of George Washington and 5 cents, I remove the thing that's the type that says 5 cents, and I remove George Washington, and you're left with just these beautiful, compositions. And this idea actually came from a book cover project I was working on, where I was working on the letters of Roald Dahl, and I was playing with the idea of using stamps in some way on the cover. We ended up going in a different, direction than this, but I really liked the idea of I had these cool stamps and I was removing them so I could use the content on them so I could use this as a book cover. And then I realized wow, these stamps have amazing kind of graphic compositions. And that led me to want to do this, even more, and then make this book that catalogs this larger kind of set of them. This is a book called 4 Flip Books. It's a flip book within a flip book within a flip book within a flip book. And so as you flip through this flip book, the kind of outermost flip book will open first, and then the flip book inside of that will open, and then the innermost flip book, opens up. So playing with this idea of, recursion. And then also catalogs of words. All books are essentially catalogs of words. And this book is a Borges short story, which I typeset, which is about like a paragraph in length. And I typeset it 1 word per page, each in a different typeface. And then it's risograph printed on these 2 bright color inks. And it really changes the experience of reading something we can only read 2 words at a time. This is a book called 234 Acknowledgements. And so it takes Pulitzer Prize winning acknowledgement pages. I scanned all the Pulitzer Prize winning acknowledgement pages and then put them in this book kind of sequentially as the years go on. And one of the things I call this press catalog press because I'm interested in books as these catalogs of dense, content. But I think there's something really that can be gained from kind of focusing on one thing and zeroing in on it and presenting it in an understandable way. Of all the books I've produced, I think this is the one that most people know about. This is 20 Slices of American Cheese. So in addition to images and words, I also publish catalogs of objects. And like the title suggests, the book is 20 Slices of American Cheese, craft singles individually wrapped. The Library of Michigan the University of Michigan bought a copy of this, and their librarian wrote this great article where she discusses with the conservator, what are we going to do about this book? Are we going to buy a fridge for it? How are we going to handle this? And the conservator, says after doing some research, like American cheese is basically shelf stable. You can leave this out for a long time and nothing's really going to happen to it. And so it's great for my book, but a little concerning for all you American cheese lovers out there. And we've since discovered that, people can bring kind of mold and germs to the book. Like Tufts has a copy and their librarian is very active in sharing it with students and visitors to their space. And so their copy is kind of molding in this lovely way. And their plan is to keep it in this plexiglass box, I think. I believe this is the copy from NYU, and their conservators recently had a little online Zoom talk where they talked about how to conserve various, challenging books. And this is one of the books that they discussed. And so they figured out that the best way to preserve this book is to keep it in a low humidity environment. So these are kind of humidity, strips, and these things all contain lots of little, silica gel packets, just like when you get shoes or something, it gets switched out to keep this, in a nice spot. And so the cheese book, 20 Slices of Cheese, led to this book, 20 Slices of Meat, which I made as kind of a visiting artist to University of Michigan's Book Art Studio. And I made it in collaboration with the famous deli there, Zingerman's, where they kindly showed me all the meats and I was able to select this beautiful mortadella on the left. I got a lot of slices and did lots of experimentation and realized that Gorilla Glue is the best way to bind a meat book. And so I made this perfect bound meat book using mortadella, which is this, mortadella has these inlaid fat and pistachios. And so when I made the cover is actually all mortadella as well. And the title is Inlaid Fat, just like mortadella has inlaid fat within it. So maybe a little bit grosser, but more delicious potentially, 20 slices of meat. And so these kind of food related projects have led, like Zach said, to some other exciting food related things. Like I recently made these Birkin bags out of vegetables for Hermé's Instagram. And then, this led to me making some of their famous scarves out of vegetables and fruits and cheese and crackers. But back to the catalog press stuff, these are some of my other object, related books, 30 napkins from the Plaza Hotel, 200 $1 bills, Splenda sweeteners, fortune cookie fortunes. And then over the pandemic, I made this book, which is an edition of one because I didn't want to use too much of my toilet paper. This is one roll of Charmin extra strong. And then, if you're making books of objects, why not make books of books? So this is a book of 15 mass market paperbacks. And this is a book of 500, sorry, talking too much, 50 mass market paperbacks. This one's 15. And so when I first made these initial books during my residency at Center for Book Arts, I also used the opportunity of making this small press as a reason to do this other project that I've been interested in for a while, which was make an inflatable book jacket. So a book jacket made of plastic that you can put around your book, blow it up, and then you can swim around in the pool or the bath and your book will stay dry. If anyone's interested, in having their own inflatable book jacket, they're stocked for a while on urbanoutfitters.com. They're currently out, but they're going to restock in the summer. But if you know of the perfect, person, this would be a great stocking stuffer, email me and I can send you one for the low, low price of $15. But I made these inflatable book jackets. And at the time I thought, hey, this is something I could see in a museum gift shop maybe. So I cold emailed a bunch of people who are the buyers for museum gift shops and trying to see if they would, stock this. And I didn't get any responses really. It was the end of summer, so I think my timing was off. But a woman from the Whitney responded and said, hey, I saw your email, we don't want your inflatable book jacket, but we have this Andy Warhol show coming up. And in the Warhol show, there's this piece where Warhol silk screened a dollar bill a bunch of times. And she had saw my website, seen the other books I'd made, and saw that I made this book, which was $200 bills, used dollar bills that I kind of ordered according to serial number. So they don't count sequentially because I just found these dollar bills, from my life, but they count up. And so I immediately, responded and said, yes, I'd love to do this because this is, way better than just selling them an inflatable book jacket that I'd already made. And so the thing I pitched was taking the title of this work, which is 192 $1 bills, and making, an edition of books also called 192 $1 bills. And so the idea was that there would be 192 $1 bills in each book. They would be fresh bills, so completely crisp, never used. And I pitched the idea of making 8 different colors. And wouldn't it be fun if we made 192 copies of this book? So the edition would be 192 of each book having 192 $1 bills in them. And we'd sell them for twice the face value. So people would at least know they're getting, half of what they're putting into this. And so excitingly, she said, yes to all of these ideas. But obviously making 192 books, each containing 192 $1 bills is expensive in terms of the materials. And so the plan was they would give me enough money to make 16 of them. We'd see how they sold. And then if they sold, we'd make more. And so I made 16, we put them in the shop. And then, 3 days later, I get this email that says, oh my gosh, we sold 13 of them. Like make all of them as fast as you can. And so then I became, frantically running around Manhattan, going to every Bank of America I could possibly go to, trying to get crisp $1 bills, which is actually a tricky thing to find because, banks don't normally have crisp $1 bills because they actually don't really feel like money. They're so, unused that people don't like them that much. But I found all the dollar bills, and then started this frantic process of binding them as quickly as I could, delivering them in batches. And then eventually I got to 192 of 192 and they sold out, which was really exciting. And so there was still some time in the show. And so they let me kind of make more books related to the show. So Andy Warhol filmed himself eating a cheeseburger. And so I made this book and he had Heinz ketchup next to him while he did it. And so I made this book, 5 ketchup, that's 5 Heinz ketchup packets. And I also made this book, 129 Die, that plays off of the title of this piece, where Warhol took the sensational newspaper headline and blew it up as a painting. And in this book, each page is a historic newspaper headline. So this is page 14 through page 19. And so each page counts up with another headline, of some disaster with that number of, die. And it was surprisingly easy to do the research and find all of these. Makes you never want to fly again in the 1940s and 50s. And this has led to other exciting collaborations with the Whitney, like this book, 400 People from Detroit, which was for their Vita Americana exhibit, which kind of closed recently, and took Diego Rivera's Detroit industry murals. And I isolated each of the figures from this mural and presented them, one per page, so you can really focus on all of the people who are in this amazing, artwork. And then riffing off of this money idea from the money books, I also made these 2 books. 77 Lucky Sevens, these are scratch off tickets, and 77 Fabuloso Sevens, which are scratch off tickets from Mexico City. The Lucky Sevens are from New York State. And so we sold these books for, a specific amount of money, but the idea was, this book is potentially worth hundreds of times more value than the person paying for it if all of these are winners. So again, this idea of kind of the commodity of the book. And then a little more than 2 years ago, I moved to Boston, where my partner's in med school. And just prior to the pandemic, I was super fortunate to start an artist residency at this place called the Broad Institute, which is this, biomedical and genomic research center between MIT and Harvard that just happens to have, an artist in residency position. So it's this amazing, amazing thing. And so I, got my little ID, got my email, and I sat in on meetings and talked to scientists, with the idea being that I would, make some book-related work that kind of explores the work that they're doing there. And the first project that I made kind of came out of a conversation with some scientists who work in their imaging platform, where they use algorithms and machine learning to kind of mine insights from biological images. So this is a set of 3 books that each contain 12,000, images of fibroblast cells or skin cells. So this book has 12,000, skin cell images from people with schizophrenia. This book has 12,000 skin cell images from people with bipolar disorder. And this book has 12,000 skin cell images from people without bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. And so what's fascinating about these books, about these images, is that when they're analyzed together, kind of all at once, machine learning algorithms can show kind of statistically significant differences between the skin cells of people with bipolar disorder and without bipolar disorder, or with schizophrenia and without schizophrenia. And so specifically, the mitochondria around the nucleus of people with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia are closer than the mitochondria of people without. But what's fascinating to me about this is that this can only be understood if you're a computer and you're understanding and seeing all of these images at once. So I wanted to make, these books that, first and foremost, kind of bring forward this really interesting insight that these scientists have found, that you can tell, these things about people and the diseases they have based on, their skin cells. And then also the fact that, you need to, that it's so many images that have to be seen at once. And so, it's hard to understand those numbers, but if you have a book that's a certain thickness, you get that right away. So as I was talking to various scientists, another thing I became fascinated with was how cell lines are used in scientific research. Specifically the idea of immortalized cell lines. So cells that, are taken from a person and then exists in a lab and can kind of go on existing indefinitely as long as, they're fed and the fridge is plugged in. So this is, a book called 60,000 Immortal Individuals that attempts to kind of catalog all we know about the individuals who these cell lines came from. And so I got all this data from this database called the Cellosaurus, which is a project of the Swiss Institute for Bioinformatics that attempts to collect all the publicly described cell lines, existent today. And so most cell lines are anonymized. And so this kind of collects what data is available. And, I got this kind of spreadsheet from them. And I tried to rearrange things to make this information kind of more readable and make it kind of like a sentence. So what this book is it presents you with kind of a sentence about each person, about everything we know about each person. So you get the age when the tissue was sampled, the sex of the individual, the disease that person may have had, maybe the tissue that it came from. So you get things like 42-year-old male with Parkinson's disease or 36-year-old female. And each of these are individuals whose cell line is described here by this number. And so most of these cell lines are anonymized, but there are some examples, in the history of science where we know, the names of individuals. Henrietta Lacks, who is a Black woman, is the most famous example of this, who you might have heard of. Cells from her cervical tumor became the first immortal cell line, and neither Henrietta nor her family knew these cells were taken at the time or that this cell line was created. And so there's obviously lots of ethical implications here. If you're interested in this story, there's a good book called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks that I recommend you read. But this is Henrietta Lacks. John Moore is another famous example. His cancer cells were developed into a cell line that was patented and commercialized by his doctor at UCLA. And he sued his doctor in UCLA to try and get some of the rights and some of the profits from his cell line. And the Supreme Court of California said, no, these are not your cells anymore. So this is kind of another famous case. But some of the individuals we know about are not because of any kind of specific ethical conversation, but because their families have decided to, let it be known that this individual contributed this cell line, to try and further scientific research. And Chrissy Thomas is an example of that. Chrissy Thomas was a 9-year-old who passed away from neuroblastoma. And we know about her cell line because her family, shared her story, and her father, I believe, named her cell line FUNB 2006. So fuck you, neuroblastoma 2006. And so I wanted to highlight these little bits of known individuals within this book, to kind of bring light to some of these ethical conversations and also share their stories, but also to make the point that there are 60,000 individuals in this book, where we don't know all of their names, but they all have stories and they're all, came from individuals, and they're all kind of continuing on in this really weird way where their cells just keep going and going. And so the book is physically big because 60,000, is a lot of individuals. And then for all these books at the Broad, I was experimenting with this process of spiral binding and spiraling spirals together to make books that could, hypothetically be infinite, and also, kind of riff on the idea of spirals, and DNA is a spiral. And so the last book I made at the Broad was this book called 345 Named Machines. And so I don't know if you've ever worked in an office that had, a printer that someone had named something funny, as a joke. And then it was easier to remember, which printer you were printing something to. And so the Broad is like that, but with like hundreds of scientific machines. And a lot of them have names with, these little pictorial name tags. And it was super interesting, almost from like an ethnographic perspective, to see kind of the cultural references that these scientists are pulling from and what they choose to name their machines after. And so I went around, all of the Broad labs, photographing them, machines that are named after, famous names in science. Here's Henrietta Lacks again, names that are machines that are named after planets, after, Greek and Roman gods. And then also jokes like these walk-in freezers. One is, Sub-Zero, and one is Christopher Walken, the walk-in freezer. They have these series of machines that are called Hamilton machines, and they're all named funny ham things like Hamlet or Hammy Potter. And so again, it was just fascinating to see all of these references that are used, from, Star Wars to Teletubbies to cartoons to like obscure internet cartoons that I remember from middle school. Lots of fun stuff there. And so the most recent book I've made as Catalog Press is called 6,000 Dandelions. And as the title suggests, this is 6,000 dandelions. They're all taken from Mount Auburn Cemetery, which a lot of you are from Boston, so I assume you're familiar with this historic kind of beautiful cemetery in Boston. And I had kind of a mini artist residency there where I got the opportunity to kind of make this project. And for a kind of 2-week window in the spring, Mount Auburn is just blooming with these dandelions. And they're there for this brief time. And then, as we all know with dandelions, they seed and then they, disappear. And so for this brief, 2-week period, I was racing around Mount Auburn, collecting as many dandelions as I could, a process which will stain your hands yellow if you're curious. I'm gathering these dandelions, pressing them so that they would be flat and dry. And then, this is kind of the big press. If anyone needs flower pressing advice, I now know a lot about flower pressing. And then I took these dandelions and laminated them in kind of this clear lamination, and then made this huge book that kind of encapsulates all of these dandelions, kind of picked before they were able to turn into these seeds and blow away. So as I take a sip of water, this is a little video flipping through the pages. And so all these books that I've been making, I didn't really realize this at the time, but they're all what's kind of considered artist books, which is, kind of a medium of artwork, just like painting and sculpture. And so the best definition I've kind of come up for artist books after kind of making them is, artist books are this book or book-like object that doesn't describe or reproduce an artwork, but is an artwork in and of itself. And if you want to learn more about artist books and how, they kind of play with form and concept as kind of being more important or as important than content, I now teach this class at Center for Book Arts where I give like this definition of artist book and then overwhelm people with a bunch of examples of artist books, and then have students kind of make an artist book as well. And so just showing you this, which is a website that I designed and then my friend Eric Lee produced, helped me code, which shows student work. So this shows some student work from the Center for Book Arts class and also from my SVA and Parsons classes. And if you click on any of the images of the students' work here, it opens up into their website, which you'll see here in this video that I made yesterday. I think it's about to do that. And so showing you this also because I think websites, in addition to books, kind of operate in a similar way. Like this website is a catalog of student work, just the same way as a book is a catalog. And so I'm interested in this idea of cataloging, not just in the physical form. And so I've been super lucky to be able to teach these classes at Center for Book Arts, and I also have been lucky to have the opportunity to design some of their graphics. So this is an identity I designed for their 2020 benefit, which was scheduled to happen April 2nd of 2020. And we all know that everything that was scheduled to happen April 2nd of 2020, never happened April 2nd of 2020, but all of these, printed materials got designed and sent out for the benefit that never was. Once things turned over to Zoom, I designed this identity for their contemporary artist book conference, which happened all online, which was super fun to be a part of. And then as I showed at the very early bit of this talk, this is an exhibition catalog I recently made for a show they had this summer. And so this is a really tall kind of pamphlet. The covers here are actually cardboard that's been silk screened to get this color on them. And the thing that I was playing with here was having all the type kind of fully justified fitting these boxes without hyphenating anything or without changing the letter spacing. And so each line kind of gets bigger and smaller as needed to make this happen. And so these are some of the inside spreads of this. And the Center for Book Arts is excitingly starting a new publication called the Book Arts Review. And so I've been able to work on them for this design. And this is almost ready to be released. So that's why these are all very small. So keep your eyes posted for the beginning of next year, where this publication that is devoted to reviewing and writing criticism about artist books will come into the world. And so this is called BAR, the Book Arts Review. And I show it to you this way on this license plate, because the most kind of recent catalog press book that I'm working on, and the most recent thing I'm collecting, is what I've been calling accidental vanity plates. So I think this is the first one I saw, where I was walking around one day and realized that this car said rat on it. And it says, 3 rat 89, which I don't think this person paid to have their car say 3 rat 89. I assume it's just this random thing that happened when they got their license plate. And so I find these things really funny. And so I kind of have seen them everywhere now. I'm just collecting images, and eventually I'm going to make a book. These say fax, these say ATM. You have these 3 guys. This is LBJ, JFK, 666. And so I currently have, over 300 of these. And once I get to like 1,000 or something, I will, publish this as a book. And so the last project I want to, kind of share is the biggest project that I've done, and will probably be the biggest project I'll ever do, or longest. It's something I started in 2011. And essentially what it's become is this daily archive of one composite image, photographs and screenshots I've taken, on that particular day, and one quote, something I heard or read on that day. Essentially, this started in 2011 when I got a DSLR camera for the first time, and I wanted to make sure I, learned how to use it. So I decided, okay, I'm gonna take a photo every day, so at least I learn how to use this camera. And to, make sure I do that, I'll start a blog where I'll post my one photo every day, and maybe I'll post a quote, as well. So it started as this way to make sure that I would use, this camera. And then it became kind of this way that when I was at college, my mom could see these photos and know that I was, alive every day, even if I didn't call as much as I should. And then I realized that I was using this as kind of a journal. I was, looking back at these photos and remembering things and liking using it as a journal. So I started collaging images together to remember more. And now it's become this crazy, crazy thing where I collage almost all the photos I've taken in a particular day together, and then post them to this kind of updated website, which kind of I designed. And then again, my friend Eric Lee kind of helped develop the backend for. So this kind of scrolls through, every day of my life, starting in 2011, and recently with these kind of crazy collages. And the site is searchable, so I can search dandelion in a specific way. And I can get all of my photos that I've tagged with dandelion. So it's, again, this kind of visual journal for myself. I can, type a date, like yesterday was November 30th. I can look back and see, okay, in 2020, it was a rainy day. I was working on this editorial illustration. In 2019, I was in New York. I saw, Marriage Story, and I had some bunch of crunch at the movies. In 2018, I was working on these books. And so it's become this kind of visual journal that is a little too time intensive to do at the moment, but something that, because I think it's this interesting project, not just as a journal, but as an art project, something that I'm planning on continuing as long as I, am continuing. So I think maybe we should end it there. Thank you so much for, letting me come and speak and share the work that I've been doing. Happy to answer any questions. Hopefully, I know I talk fast. Hopefully I didn't go too fast, but thanks everybody.
Thank you. That was fantastic. I'm blown away. You had me at ice cream. I would love to hear questions as well. So I'm going to turn myself off so people can chime in.
I see Zach in the chat saying that MoMA Design Studio, the like design team at MoMA, has a big printer called Harry Plotter, which is great.
Eric Lee, your buddy, cued me into that one.
Great. I think I see a hand raised. I don't know if, feel free to, I don't know how you guys want to do the question and answer, but.
Hello, Ben. Thank you so much for sharing your process and your work. I appreciate a lot. I have a question because I saw you had a lot of repetitive images and or even repeating the act of taking photos or collect the artifacts. So I wonder, like, what did you find, like, what amazed you to repeating things, or did you ever feel like the boredness of repeating things? Can you talk about from the graphic way or the activity itself? Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I think some of it comes from a desire to kind of fully explore something. You know, some of it comes from a desire of, you know, it's kind of fun to make collages. And so I made a lot partially because it was just fun. You know, like if I didn't want to do anything else I was doing at college, I knew I could go, you know, to my little studio space and make collages. So some of the repetition comes from enjoying the process of doing the thing that I'm repeating. And then some of it comes from this belief that like quantity is a quality, you know, in and of itself, and that you get something from having, like, it's more interesting to me to have 2,000 photos of license plates that are funny and weird than it is to have 2 of them. I think you get something from the quantity. So that kind of spurs a little bit of it.
Thank you.
Well, speaking of quantity, when do you know when is the time to stop?
It's a great question. Sometimes you have to stop, you know, if it's like a design project, you know, there's always a deadline with a design project. So you're forced to stop at some point. For some of the catalog press books, I guess in answer to the other question, eventually sometimes I want to stop doing the thing. And so that's when I try and, you know, stop. And the catalog press books are often, you know, titled with a number. And so sometimes it's like, if I get close to a number that sounds interesting for some reason, then I'll kind of work up to that number or something. And then sometimes I never know when to stop. And it's like the ice cream book photos, you know, I'll stop once it collapses because I don't know when to stop. And for this kind of photo a day thing, I don't think I'm ever going to stop, partially because I think it's good if I never stop. Hopefully that answered. It was kind of a non-answer.
Do your art projects ever get in your daily life? Like you're having your Sunday leisure with your partner, and you guys are having like avocados, and you're like, oh, what to do now?
No, definitely. We're walking around. We often walk, and I'll take photos of things. And so I often, like Lily, my partner, I often stop our walks often because I'm taking photos of, you know, license plate or details. And oftentimes on Sunday when I was, you know, really, I've slowed down on the progress for the ice cream books. I used to post kind of twice a week and then, you know, once every week and then once every 2 weeks. Now I'm kind of a once a few months poster, but I definitely, some of my Sundays when that was going on, I was running around to ice cream shops, you know. So it definitely does get into the life.
That doesn't sound like a bad Sunday though.
Definitely. I've sampled quite a bit of ice cream.
It's
Then
under the
I have-
guise of art too.
Totally, it's for a good cause. I'm in love with the collaboration that you discovered with the Whitney for the Warhol exhibition. So glad that worked out how it did. And I love the book 129 Die. I've been curious how, I think you and Lily maybe collaborated on that. I've been curious how you went about finding how did you do that research? How did you gather all the content for that?
And that is a book where I collaborated with Lily, my partner. We this is another bit of life and art, coming together. When I was given the opportunity to make more books for the show, we both went to the show, and I kind of was looking around for ideas, and Lily immediately kind of saw that and said, okay, I have your idea. And so she came up with the idea to kind of focus on that work and do this process with it. But the newspapers I found on newspapers.com, which is a great resource for newspaper archives, and you can get a free subscription for like 10 days. And within those 10 days, I found all my newspapers.
No way. So you just you set up an account and then just would search for 1 dies, 2 die, 3 die, 4 die.
Exactly. And then it was a
Wow.
process of like weeding out, like I only wanted headlines. So I got a lot of, 1 die in the story, bit. And they have somewhat of a trying to be sophisticated search, but it doesn't really work. So it's a long process of finding the right things, the right headlines. I got a question directly to me in the chat, which was, what is with the bookcases behind you? There's no type on any of the spines. And the bookcases behind me are unfortunately a Zoom trickery. It's a digital background to seem very, very official.
It's also very meta.
Yeah, trying to stay on brand for the talk.
If I might jump in, I was fascinated, impressed, and cowed by, well, really everything you showed us, but especially when you were showing us the many iterations of book jacket designs that you would do and show the editors. And I was wondering, because that's something that I do too, but my process is different. I don't tend to do quantity. And I'm wondering if, I'm thinking about the phenomenon that you might have heard of, the paradox of choice, which is how people can be actually kind of paralyzed, even though it seems like more choice would be better. Do you ever find that, not only maybe as a designer, or maybe when you're consulting with other people, like how is it that you present, say, your first round, how many are in there, and then how do you winnow it down or develop to the next round, and how do you stop iterating, et cetera? Because I know that one does run out of time and money. So.
Yeah, totally. And for some I make more and some I make less, so it's not always a crazy amount of experimentation. One of the nice things about being an in-house book cover designer is I felt that I was essentially paid to fail. So I felt like I experimented a lot my first years as a book cover designer because I was paid no matter what. And so I got to, explore a lot of things. And in terms of how many you show, we wouldn't show all of those necessarily to the editor and the publisher. Sometimes I share more with the art director, and then we decide, on a few. And when I was at Penguin, I actually worked for 3 different imprints at various times. I worked for Riverhead Books, Blue Rider Press, and Penguin Press. And so each of those art directors had a different relationship with their publisher. And so, one of them would show, like 7 things. One of them would show 5 things. And one of them would try and just show 1 thing and be like, this is the thing. And so it definitely is this process of, I think as an art director, it's a process of figuring out that human relationship between the person with your pitching and seeing, is this person someone who's going to need to have 3 things to be able to choose this one? Or is this someone who I've developed a relationship where they'll trust me that we did a lot and this is the best one? So it's all that kind of like human relationships.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm also going to take that phrase. I'm going to try it out with my employer that I'm paid to fail. See how that goes. But you have to fail up or something, whatever that phrase is.
Yeah. I love the cat.
Thank you. Love your books, Ben. Been a long time fan. I guess, was there a moment, was it like an artist book or an artist that made you look at books like as objects or as like a vehicle for like something else, or was it like intuitive?
I'm not totally sure. Like I've kind of been telling this story about, doing readings in school that were just PDFs. Like I feel like I've been saying that enough that that's what I think that's what it was, but I can't totally remember if there was some thing I saw, before that, or some moment. I think I've always liked books, especially books that are dense catalogs of things. Like I like the idea of like a reference book as this thing that has all of these things packed into this one, object. And yeah, so I don't know if there was a exact moment, before I started putting nails in books and stuff. I think it was really realizing that book cover design was a job, then, paying more attention to books and, getting more books around me that then I, could put nails in them and explore.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Which is the most challenging material you've worked with? Every new material is challenging, until you figure it out. So for the cheese, I tried a bunch of things before I realized that I could use some super glue that worked with plastic. The meat was challenging because it was, initially I tried sewing the Meatbook and tried a few different, things. But the meat wasn't challenging because I could work through lunch because I didn't have to go get lunch. I could just eat my, scraps as I was working. So yeah, I guess it's a challenge figuring out how to like make some of the structures at times.
Have there been materials that you have tried and just thought this is not lending itself to binding?
I think they're
I mean, if
definitely,
you've conquered mortadella, I guess
yeah.
is off limits.
I can't think of an example offhand, but there have definitely been things I've tried that haven't worked out that have forced me to go down
I
different.
smell an internet challenge.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't know if you can see a couple more questions.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I just saw them. One is asking, seems another important quality of your success is, let's call it marketing acumen. Where did you learn and practice that skill, that marketing acumen skill? I guess if I had to pinpoint something that really helped, is I think studying architecture actually really helped, even though I didn't go into, I decided to study architecture because I liked studio-based classes. I wanted to have something I made rather than a paper I'd written. But you make something and then you stand up and you present it in front of people. And so I think going through school and seeing, just like sitting in lots of presentations and going to lots of lectures, you start realizing, oh, I'm interested in this because this person is presenting it in this way. Oh, this is engaging me. And so I think it's just learning and picking up things by seeing things that I thought were successful and trying to emulate them. You also seem to have a really amazing network. How do you go about cultivating the network? So that's something that kind of sometimes happens accidentally. Like the ice cream books thing grew because I was tagging the publisher, the author, and the editor, and all these people. And then they posted it on their Instagrams because it was like their work that they were advertising. And so that's an example of like kind of growing an accidental network where it's not like I actually know these people, but they know about ice cream books because I, took something of theirs and, helped them advertise it. So I think it's just about engaging with other people's stuff would be one way to go about that. I know there are some in the chat, but Reed, I see you have a hand.
Yeah, I was curious. I'm sure there's a lot of variation, but would you say your individual like bookmaking process is more analog or more like done on the computer?
In terms of like book covers or like the catalog?
Well, let's say like, yeah, like a book cover. Like I know you did like a lot of analog work for your book covers, but do you spend more time in Photoshop messing with that, whatever program?
Yeah, a lot of it happens in the computer, and a lot of it kind of depends on what resources I have to get off of the computer sometimes. So like when I was at Penguin, I had these printers right there. And so I could, use them and print and take all these pages and do things with it. Then when I left Penguin, I have my own printer, but it's not as good. And so I found myself kind of working more on the computer or taking photos and then doing stuff in Photoshop. So definitely a lot of it does happen on the computer, but I find that when I'm stuck on the computer, it can be useful to try and get off of it in some way, or take something I've designed on the computer and print it out and run it underwater and see if that makes it more interesting. Sometimes it's just like out of desperation, trying whatever I have around because I don't feel like it's working, but maybe if I crumple it up and do something, it'll somehow magically be more interesting. And sometimes it works, a lot of times it doesn't.
Thank you.
What is the book that changed your life forever? How so? It's a very tricky question. I don't think there's just one. I think the first book I ever read was Go Dogs Go. So maybe Go Dogs Go.
Well, this might be a good time to say one more round of heartfelt thank yous. This was so invigorating and thought-provoking. And if there are further questions, I think maybe it's fine to maybe send them in and we can
Yeah, definitely.
and we're going to this, as everybody knows, this presentation has been recorded, so a video will be posted pretty soon, probably within the week, to the Society of Printers YouTube site, and we will post a link to that so people can. I know and I'm sure other people want to go back and look at the recording so that we can pause because you showed so many things, and it was part of the effect is that they went by in a blur, but I'd like to also go back and see things one by one. So I'm so glad we can do that.
Totally. Well, thank you again for having me. I mean, if people do have questions that you didn't ask or I didn't answer, my email is just ben.denzer@gmail.com. Also, if people want inflatable book jackets, that can be your way of getting those.
Thought you never asked.
Thanks so much, Ben.
Anyway, thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Excited to be here and share our work.
Yes, thank you. Have a nice night, everyone.